You're listening to NFT 365, the first daily podcast on NFTs with your host, Fanzo.
This idea of NFTs and Web3 and creator economy, cryptocurrency, metaverse, social tokens, blockchain. We could go into edge computing, 5G technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Part of us want to kind of just say, holy hell, can we get just like a pause or a stop? Can we kind of go back a little bit? Can we shift or kind of like pause? And I think, it's very easy for us to recognize that this is a lot of change at once. It's a lot of change at once in how we look at the technology, where this technology kind of plays into our lives. And then even probably more so than anything else, we also have to recognize that, in this kind of emerging Web3 world, one of the big shifts is the fact that it is a big shift. And we are moving from a way of internet life that we've been accustomed to since really many of us kind of lived into the internet, to a shift in how everything is kind of delivered, where things are going. And so I want to kind of touch on just this idea of Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, and hopefully help kind of connect the dots. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more in a future episode about like the role NFTs play directly in the creator economy. I'm going to also talk a little bit more about kind of the breakdown of some of the schematics of what all of this means in the bigger picture. But really what we have to think about in like the Web 1 arena of where we were to where we are now, and kind of how that all kind of comes together. If you think about it this way, Web 1, which was kind of like 1989 to 2005, was really this idea of we create something online or someone builds something online and we consume it, right? So it was very much of a passive experience. Like the users went there and just read. So it was more of a read-only type experience. Web 2, which kind of emerged in the late 1990s, 1999, was really focused on this idea of creation of content, the ability to us to have social interaction, which is that like read, write, back and forth, and also like user-generated content, right? So the fact that we, as users of the internet, we're also now adding to the content of the internet. And that opened up many doors. And one could argue it opened up just as many good as it opened up just as many bad. But if we think about this from a bigger picture perspective on what all of this means, and even how we can kind of factor in things like, where we're going, part of it was we were originally a read-only internet world. And then we became a read-write internet world, right? Where we were reading, but we were also writing, to the internet. And now Web 3, and where we've kind of moved, and really Web 3 started in like the mid 2000s, but really it's emerging over the last many years, is the idea it's not only read, it's not only write, but it's also this idea of execution, or what I like to think of it as is really immersive interactions, right? The idea that it's not just about what we write or what we read, but it's actually looking at the bigger picture of all of our actions and how do those things kind of factor in. Now, if you want to simplify it this way, right? The Web 1 was just websites. Web 2 was blogs, social media, and content creation. And Web 3 is the idea of artificial intelligence, true machine learning, and this idea that it's not just about what we put on the internet or what we read on the internet, but it's about tying a lot of these things together. Now, we've used the word on the podcast a lot, the word decentralization. And I think it's definitely not a buzzword, but it's something that we throw around a lot when it comes to like what this whole world means. But really what we have to be focusing on is actually the technology that I started talking about back in 2013, which is this idea of blockchain and the blockchain, technology of really what blockchain enables and how all of these things come together. Now, before we talk blockchain, we have to also recognize the world that we've been living in up until today. And I know for many, you've probably heard me say this on stage, but it's important for me to, kind of reiterate this again, is that, if you've been using a service or a network or a platform for free, you've been paying for it with your data and your time and attention. Let me say that again. If you've been using a platform for free, you've been paying with it with your data, your time, and your attention. Now, one could actually argue that data now, part of the reason that Web3 even exists is we've realized that actually in many cases, the data we can provide is far more worth, far more money, far more value to businesses, to brands, to world domination than any financial amount of money. And what I mean by that is, if we think about it from a marketing or advertising perspective, the fact that we give up our data on what we like, what we do, what we interact, what we don't like, what we consume, what we want more of, we're pretty much giving all of this data voluntarily to the secret to serve us up, with a more direct to consume experience. And let's face it, Facebook ads, the reason Facebook is worth so much money and the reason, Facebook ads have existed in the way they have is because it's the data that has never existed offline before, right? If you were able to supply some of the greatest salespeople in the world to do offline sales and you were able to give them, hey, I'm going to give you all this information about the people. I'm going to only put you in front of the people that are ready to buy and that have all of the qualities that you want. I mean, you would hit it out of the park. And really that's what, we've kind of lived in this world, is this Web 2 world where the data that we were providing, the actions that we were taking was providing data for really businesses, brands to monetize, to scale, to grow. Where we're moving towards now is like, wait a second. If our data is that valuable, why are the businesses, the entities, the platforms making all of the money? Why aren't we as the users also able to not only make money or to control the data that we actually, have at our disposal, but why aren't we able to also take advantage of that and leverage that for the things that we want to do? And it's really not like a entrepreneur versus like enterprise play. It's more of like platform versus individual play. And so one of the big pieces of this is the idea that, my background being in cybersecurity for 9 years, I've always played in this line where I never looked at privacy as something that really existed anymore. And I know that can be scary for a lot of people, but I've always looked at it as kind of like selective exposure or selective sharing, where, it's funny because people will be like, Brian, I don't want to put my salary online. I don't want to talk about how much money I make. Yet, let's face it, I mean, between the amount of data that we have at our disposal, the way that we're able to data mine things, that we're able to see job postings that are similar to yours. We're able to understand what past contracts, what future contracts are going to be sold for. For the most part, we can figure out a lot of this data, a lot of this information that we've been quote unquote hiding from people, right? Like the idea that's like, I don't want to put my address online because I don't want people to know where I live. Well, for many of us, we remember what a phone book looked like, and we remember the fact that we could pretty much look up anyone anywhere and figure out who they were, what they were about, based on their name. So like a lot of that has shifted. Now, the reason a lot of that has become such a high attention is because when we have easier access to data and information, it gives us as well as those bad actors the ability to leverage that data, that information for both good and for evil, right? And I can't say this enough. There's no technology, no innovation since the beginning of time has ever fixed stupid or stopped bad people from doing bad things. But when we think about this, we have to think about like that balance, right? And part of the beauty of Web3 and where we're moving is this idea that we as individuals will have a lot more control while also being able to live in a more transparent exchange of value, of information, of how we kind of live online. Now, with that also comes this idea of how do we monetize? How do we get paid for the things, the information, the data that we're sharing? But also, how do we know who has what and where all of these things are kind of going? And that's kind of an exciting time for us, because now we kind of get to re-examine a lot of the world that we've lived in. Now, with all of that, there also comes this idea with the more data sharing that we enable, we also have to think about it from the sharing of data and information that we are not voluntarily putting out there, right? When we think about data collection in the Web 2 world, it's kind of like, what are those groups called, right? It's not a survey group, but it's a group of people brought together and said, okay, this is our sample size, this is our sample group. We're going to survey them, and because they match a lot of the demographics, we're going to assume based on this group of information that we can determine trends based on what they're voluntarily going to share with us. Well, with the emergence of things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and then you combine that with devices in this Internet of Things world where we have smart speakers, and we have Ring doorbells, and we have things like Siri, which Siri is really a Web3 enabled app for all intents and purposes. What we're really enabling now is this ambiguous. It's kind of an interesting world where it's no longer just about we being connected. It's about this true shift to a peer-to-peer example and a peer-to-peer world. And in Web 2, this is the way I like to think about it from a standpoint of, if you were creating a blog or you were putting information online, you would bring the information together. You would select the tags and the categories that you want people to discover your content. In the Web3 world, it's less about, hey, I'm creating the content and putting these buckets. And it's more of like, I'm creating the content and putting it out there. And then thanks to artificial intelligence, machine learning, it's going to decide not only who should find that information or where that information should live, but what does that experience live or look like for each one of those individuals. And, it comes down to a lot of, change in architecture, change in the way that we think about like the different layers and the world that we're living in. Now, Web3 isn't all advantages, but there are definitely some advantages in the idea of data privacy and control. The idea that now that once we're logging things in the blockchain, or that we are being able to put things into our wallets where it's no longer, Google or Apple or Amazon or Facebook, they can't log into my to my actual wallets, right? Like, I hold the seed phrase, I hold the keys, this information, this data, what is stored on this is mine and mine only. Now, you can argue that also comes with that risk, but that's one of them. Another one that we can think about is this like idea of removing some of the barriers, but also some of the friction that has existed in our day-to-day lives, and really giving us this like seamless services, seamless interaction, to where we no longer are going to have to work with the middlemen or the those middle groups. And that's really what blockchain threatens the most, right? Blockchain ultimately threatens the middle tiered experiences that have existed everywhere, right? And for many of us, that we can think about it in how we share our data, or how we share our money, right? How we pay, who facilitates a payment, right? In the Web 2 world, like, I'm going to put my money into PayPal, and I'm going to send my information, my money from with PayPal to another person. Well, PayPal is that intermediate, right? Like, they're the ones that are facilitating that transaction. But in the blockchain world, all I need is your wallet address, and I send things from me directly to you without any intersection in between. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter your background. I do not need to figure out, like, hey, is Venmo work in Canada? Hey, is PayPal okay in the UK? Whatever that may be. And so a lot of this removal of friction and middle ground, well, first of all, it's threatening a lot of companies, a lot of businesses, a lot of businesses and services have been really taking advantage of, or sitting in that role And now they're going to become obsolete, right? And like those are the businesses, and that's why banks, of course, are very, overwhelmed or, worried about this. But this is also requiring us to even, shift how we think about transparency and how we think about, data accessibility, right? Because now if there is no middle person kind of adding that like weird layer of our data, now we're able to see a lot of like, I have something, I send it to you. Previously, it was I have something, I put it for sale. What I have, where I put it for sale, facilitates the interaction there. And there's a lot of loss, right? There's a lot of this idea of like, I don't know who owns what, right? Even in the sense of like when you sell a house, right? When you're selling a house, in most cases or in many cases, that that transaction is facilitated through so many different, vehicles, so many different middle scenarios that it's not really a one-to-one interaction, but it really is, right? Like I own the house, someone else is buying it from me and going to move in, yet we've kind of created a lot of these layers. Now, with this like Web3, other part of this is as we shift our data and our information onto the blockchain and allow that transparency, yet also encryption and privacy, one of the things that's really going to be powerful is that we're now able to process big data without having big data problems. And what I mean by that is previously the data collected was very siloed, right? Where you would have the marketing team would be collecting some data, the sales team would be collecting some data, the hiring team would be collecting some data, probably the PR comms team would be collecting some data. And being able to bring that data together and then being able to overlap it to understand what's going on, let's face it, was a very complex scenario, and it caused more problems in most cases than what was kind of worth it for us. So when we think about this Web3 world and where all of this is coming together, part of the beauty of this Web3 shift is a mindset shift more so than anything else. It's the mindset shift away from saying, hey, these are the things and ways that we interact, to saying, I now can control, I now can, own a lot of the things that previously we just gave away without much, hesitation to it. Now, the interesting part about this is that it kind of plays into what our POP is for this episode, which is our proof of podcast, which is we is greater than me. So for those that are playing along at home, we is greater than me is our phrase here for our last one here in February. And what I mean by that is, I've always said that to be part of a great we, you must first be the best me that you can be, right? It's a very play on words, right? So, and it's very simple, right? Like to be part of a great team, you first have to know what your strengths and weaknesses are and come to the table being the best person that you are, so that A, you can share and interact, but B, if you are at your best, it also allows you to consume and know what you need, right? Like I really feel like self-awareness, knowing what you don't know, is actually a superpower that people don't really often tap into. And it's something that you have to really factor into things like collaboration and teamwork and this idea of like, how do we grow together? How do we move forward together? But interestingly enough, you would almost think that by removing the power from the big players and giving it back to individuals, it's going to make, the idea of teamwork and collaboration and co-creation more difficult. But it's actually not. If and when we move into this world of this like decentralized sharing and we switch our mindset to this idea that just because we know something, it does not make us smarter or does not make us better by holding it on to it, right? The ways of the old, where if you know something, you should hold on to it, because by holding on to the information that nobody else has, you are now worth more money, you are more valuable. But as we've learned, it's actually those that are willing to share, to educate, to push forward, to innovate, to open source. Those are the people that are actually more valuable. But that is a mindset shift, right? And the whole adage, like, what if you get hit by a bus, right? Like I remember hearing that growing up. This is a shift in how we think of ownership. It's a shift in how we think of the transfer of value. And it's even a shift in even how we even think about the role the internet will play in our lives, right? And let's face it, right now, our most of our devices, even our phones for the most part, aren't very smart. Like, we could call it a smartphone, but let's face it, like, even the idea that my phone isn't aware that I'm at home, right? Like, yes, we can put in some things that are voluntarily, but shouldn't it know that I spend this amount of hours in this one location? And based on the trends of the average human being, if they spend this amount of time in one location, more than likely that is their physical home, right? Like, that idea of like being able to truly determine things. Like, even like a smart refrigerator, right? Like, the idea right now, like, my daughters and I, when we go to the grocery store, I take pictures of the fridge, I take pictures of our cabinet so we know what we have at home, so we don't buy duplicates, and we don't forget to buy ketchup when we only have a little bit of ketchup left. But in this world where 5G technology is going to allow us to be more connected at higher speeds, and the idea that we're going to be able to have true artificial intelligence, shouldn't we actually be able to have our refrigerator connected to our phone, and our refrigerator tells us what is in there, what is, hey, you only have 3 beers left in your 6-pack. Hey, your gallon of milk is down to 2% left of it, and we know based on your milk consumption habits that it's going to last you 1.1 days. Now, that might sound a little like not freaky, but hey, it's a lot of information. But let's face it, we're living in a world where all of this information is there. We have the ability for us to be able to determine a lot of this information. The problem has been where this information lives and how it's shared has really been in this weird centralized world where we can't put all that information in one location. And so the most exciting part about this with Web3, and it connects perfectly into NFTs, is we now are shifting our mindset into this collaboration, community, and co-creation environment. Those are like the 3 C's, right? We have collaboration, community, and co-creation. Now, with those 3 C's, in this world where, hey, we are decentralized, the question now becomes, well, if we are now decentralized and we're holding, we now control our data information, how do we find others that are like us if that information or data is not publicly at brands or platforms' disposals? This is where you insert NFTs, where NFTs, a non-fungible token, gives us the ability to add identity to a decentralized world, right? The idea that this is something that is identifying with me and I am the only one that has it, hence it's non-fungible. But it has that individuality, but it also connects me to a greater community. So when people talk about like NFTs are fake and NFTs are crap and NFTs are just a Ponzi scheme and money making, and yes, right now we are dealing with majority of people that are in NFTs or crypto are in it simply for the money. And hey, we are living in a .com world, not a .org world. I am not one that I need to make money, and that's something that I know. Even with like this podcast, with buying an NFT every single day, it's something that I've had to recognize that if I'm not, adding sponsors to the podcast, if I'm not taking in money, like I'm not gonna be able to deliver the value long term that I want to deliver for all of you that are listening. Now, with that being said, this is where NFTs really shift that narrative, because anyone can launch an NFT, and an NFT can ultimately represent anything and everything, right? And I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, and I'm gonna do a whole episode. Maybe it'll be tomorrow's episode or the day after's episode on this idea of NFTs and the creator economy. But I think it's really important for us to understand Web3 and the blockchain. And then even more so than anything else, I know a lot of people will say, Brian, what we're doing with NFTs, can't that be done with a basic QR code? Or hasn't that always been done with a Facebook group? Or hasn't that always been done with a gym membership when we show up to our gym? Well, yes, in many ways, what we're doing is we're taking a lot of this functionality, a lot of these services, a lot of these goods, a lot of these products that were Web 2 enabled, and we need them to be able to be empowered in a Web 3 world where we take away the control. Rather than the gym membership being controlled by the gym, shouldn't the gym membership, because I'm going to put this out there, right? And this is kind of me on the fly. If a gym existed and everyone decided to no longer go to that gym, would that gym still be in business? I'll answer it for you. No. So therefore, if you think about it, it's the people that are actually using the gym memberships that control and determine the value of that gym. But in the Web 2 world we've lived in, they determine how long our contracts are, what happens if we want to quit the gym early, what happens if we move locations. And let's face it, that power dynamic has been backwards since day one. Shouldn't the fact that I know that by me holding this gym membership, I am contributing to this gym existing. But if I move, shouldn't I be able to sell my gym membership that I paid for, that I actually have that ownership rights to? And so these are the things that we're shifting in Web 3. And so really for those that are like kind of like, okay, Brian, you kind of overwhelmed me. Brian, you talked about a lot of different things. Like, what does this all mean? You're not gonna need to know about like what's the difference between a semantic web versus with blockchain versus a non version, or you're not going to need to understand like what is edge computing and Internet of Things mean to the world prior to. What we need to think about this is, if we want to shift the balance, we understand, like every person that's listening to this, you should understand that your data and information, the time and attention you spend on things is actually the value that you provide. Everything from what TV programs you watch determines if a TV show is renewed for the next year, right? And what music you listen to determines which artists continue to get signed. And we as individuals have always had that control, always been the variable that determines value, yet we've never had the actual ability to control and methodically move that around, right? The idea of like a Nelson box, right? Or a Nielsen box on our TV determining which, we've all heard it, right? Like, how did that TV show get canceled? That was my favorite TV show and all my friends loved it. Well, probably more than likely, they were taking a sample size of what they quote unquote believed was the right demographic, and they were making assumptions based on that. Well, what if we could take away the need to make assumptions, and we were able to have all of this transparent information and data logged on the blockchain to where it was no longer making assumptions of what people wanted or didn't want or what people were using or not using. And we were actually able to leverage that to actually make the right decisions at the right time. And to me, this is where it is truly a we is greater than me scenario. But what we have to recognize is in Web 2, we had all the power. The we had all the power. In Web 3, we're going to give the power back to the me so that we can redefine the we that we want to be a part of. Now, hopefully you kind of calculate a little bit of that steps. I'm also going to do an episode where I kind of break down, the four, what I consider like the four spokes into, or what we could really call it the four highways into the Web 3 world. And those, of course, are cryptocurrency, social tokens or creator coins, NFTs, and the metaverse. And we also have some episodes coming up on the metaverse, understanding a little bit more of that world. But I really just want to, I recognized I was going through all of our episodes here on the podcast, trying to like, okay, what are the things we talked about? What are the things we haven't talked about? And I recognized there was a big gap on trying to help us wrap our head around Web 3. Because I know for so many of you, like, you're probably the only person in your friend group right now that are interested in NFTs. And if you're not, like, can I be friends with your friend group? Because actually, that's why we have our Discord, right? Discord.gg/ADHDcoin. Jump over to our Discord. You'll find a bunch of people that share the same purpose and passion as you as well. So with all of that being said, we are going to go through this mindset shift together. There's not like an easy button. There's not hey, like, let me upgrade from Web 2 to Web 3. Like, there's no like direct, easy way to do that. But it starts with the mindset shift. It starts with understanding what things we now can control and what things we can't control. We must a mindset shift to understand what are the things that we enjoyed in Web 2 that we need to reimagine in Web 3 if we shift that power dynamic, we shift how we share value, and we eliminate borders and barriers to how all of these things interact. Can you guys tell that I'm just a little bit passionate and a little bit excited about Web 3? If you're a part of a business, an organization, an association, and you want to help your organization understand Web3, this is something that I do give a keynote on. I don't really promote my own business that pays my bills, which is as a full-time speaker, but I'm going to put it out there. If you want me to help, and I customize my talks to your audience, to your demographic, to your world. If that's something of interest to you, you can just hit us up. Any of the social channels, or even just send me an email, brian@isocialfans.com. And I would love to find a way to collaborate and bring a lot of these messages to your organization, to your association, to your business, your mastermind, whatever that may be. So until tomorrow, my friends, make it a great day. Cheers. All right. Thanks everybody here in the wonderful world of the wonderful world of video. I have a little bit of notes here. Actually, here, I'll let you guys. Can you guys see? Let's see. You want to see a little sneak peek into? Oh, that doesn't help. Here we'll go. We're gonna tilt this up a little bit. There you go. So this is a little bit into my world. I know it's a little bit probably off focus, but yeah. So this is. If we looked at it like threefold, that's a whole lot of me. But what the thing that I think is kind of one of those things that is exciting and where we can kind of go with a lot of this kind of world is bringing a lot of these thoughts together. And so I try to not make it overwhelming, not too confusing. Hopefully for everyone that kind of tuned in, you got a little bit of like understanding the future of where we're going, understanding how a lot of this interactivity is going to not only impact our day-to-day lives, but even how we're going to push forward in this kind of digital world. And I'm excited by it. I'm excited about the possibilities, but I'm also not naive. There's a lot of things that we still need to work on. Things like environmental impact. Things like how do we create an insurance level of protection into our world, even in a decentralized world. So lots of those things coming up in future episodes. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Also a little sneak peek from the sky cam on everything we have going on here in this world. And till tomorrow. Cheers.